Okay, good evening. I'm Jorge Salinas. I will be doing my presentation on the anatomy of cells. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Cells are the smallest functioning unit of life. They make up tissues, which make up organs, which make up the organ systems, which make up human organism. There are different types. They're all unique in their functions. They all have different processes and functions that they carry out unique to themselves. They're comprised of subcellular units, and they reproduce asexually. Let's go ahead and get into the different types of cells. First up, we have the cells that connect tissues. Example of this would be epithelial cells. I have a diagram on the right side, which didn't render all that well, but it's there. They can arrange themselves in a variety of different ways depending on what organ they're serving. An example of this could be the simple, I believe it's called simple squamous epithelial cells. And those kinds of cells, they allow, I have it written right here, give me 1 second. Those allow the exchange of nutrients between blood vessels. That's that specific function that carries out. Let's go ahead and move on. The cells responsible for movement, I have it on the diagram to the left. There's the skeletal muscle cells, the smooth muscle cells, and the cardiac muscle cells. This slide focuses on the skeletal muscle cells, which are responsible for voluntary movement. A movement like this would be carried out by your smooth muscle. It's voluntary. Cells responsible for nutrient storage. It's everybody's least favorite cell. It's the fat cell. As that slide says, it's responsible for nutrient storage, so it's vital in its function. Cells that fight disease. We have macrophages, which are responsible for phagocytosis, which is the destruction of another cell. Typically destroys bacteria that is harmful to you, and other kind of random things that are just floating around. They just kind of get rid of it, keep everything clean. And to the right is what I thought was a pretty cool picture of white blood cells, which are macrophages. Then we have cells that transmit information. Another cool picture that I thought, which is a bunch of neurons, and I believe they're firing. These are nerve cells. Nerve cells, such as neurons, transmit information from one place to another, and they're necessary for actions. All actions, especially things like movement, they have to carry. An example would be like a stimulus. If I want to pick up this paper, I have to first grab it, and it has to register through my arm to my brain. My brain has to tell my arm, go ahead and pick it up. I pick it up. That's the way that works, basically. The cells responsible for reproduction, sex cells. We have sperm in males, and then the eggs in females. And then I have a picture of a few sperm racing towards an egg. Then we have the subcellular units. These are going to be organelles. Organelles are what make up the inside of the cells and make them function. Just like cells, they're each unique in their own structure and functions. They're considered subcellular because they are smaller than cells, subcell, and necessary for cells to carry out their functions. We have the different organelles. We have the nucleus, which is the brain of the cell. It gives the other organelles, tells them what to do, basically. We have the plasma membrane that separates the insides of the cell, which is like all the insides, from the outside environment-ish. Within the plasma membrane is the cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm is what all the other organelles are floating around in. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, which supplies all the other organelles with power to do things they do, and that kind of thing. Lysosomes and peroxisomes are kind of like macrophages, and they're phagocytes, and they just keep the inside of the cell clean. And then we have the centrioles, and then on the right we have all the organelles that are responsible for synthesizing proteins, which is the ribosomes, the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi apparatus. And then I have a picture of a mitochondria at the bottom. Then we have the cell cycle, which consists of the interphase and the mitotic phase. The interphase consists of 4 subphases, as you can see on the right picture. The three biggest kind of pictures is the G1 phase, the S phase, and the G2 phase. Those are all the interphases. So we'll start with the first phase within the interphase, which is actually called a subphase, which is the gap 1 phase. In this phase, the cell is growing and actively synthesizing proteins. Time spent in this phase varies from cell to cell. It could be a minute, an hour, day, week, or a month. It depends on the cell. Oh, actually, let's go back to that. This cell, however, is not permanent, and the cell will always continue to the S phase unless that cell is no longer reproducing, I guess, like no longer capable of mitosis. Then it'll stay in a gap 0 phase, which is basically this phase. It just never gets out of it. The S phase, which is the synthesis phase, the DNA begins to replicate, and this is vital going into the mitotic phase, because the DNA has to have split evenly so that there's two sister cells, or two daughter cells, I believe, that are basically the same. They have to split evenly so that they're both functioning cells. The gap 2 phase is the quickest phase of the interphase, and it's right before the mitotic phase, and all the organelles are basically getting in position and getting ready for what's to come. Then there's the mitotic phase. There's 4 phases of mitosis. It's the prophase, the metaphase, the anaphase, and the telophase. Okay, I was wondering if that was the last slide. I'm going to go ahead and break down these phases. I had to keep this one on paper because it was just too much to put into the PowerPoint, and I also was scared I'd forget. So, in the prophase, it's split into two parts. It's the early phase and the late phase. The early prophase, the chromatin begins to condense and it becomes chromosomes, which is like the little X things, the little chromosomes. In the late prophase, the nuclear envelope breaks apart and allows the chromosomes to float freely around the cytoplasm of within the nucleus. At the same time, the centrosomes, which is a bundle of centrioles, which was an organelle I mentioned earlier, begin to move towards the opposite sides of the cell. And the second phase is the metaphase. In this phase, the chromosomes have successfully moved. The centrosomes, they've successfully moved to opposite sides of the nucleus, and they begin to pull the chromosomes towards one another. This results in the chromosomes getting stuck in the middle, and it forms I think it's the metaphase plate, something like that. It's a plate, and it forms right in the middle. Directly after is the anaphase. This is where the centromeres tear the chromosomes in half, so we have V shapes on either sides going towards the centromeres. Directly or during anaphase, towards the end and into the telophase, is when cytokinesis happens. So the chromosomes have gone to their respective centromeres, and the cell begins to split in two by cytokinesis, which is the splitting of the cytoplasm. So it goes kind of like that, and it splits apart, which leads to the formation of the two daughter cells. In the telophase, this is the final phase, and this is when the daughter cells begin to develop their own nuclear envelope and become their own cells. These cells will now carry out their own cell processes and develop their own organelles, and have now begun the cell cycle all over, and are in the gap 1 subphase of the interphase within their own cell cycle. And that is the rundown, basically, of the anatomy of cells. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And yeah, thank you very much. Have a good one.